With the open debate here, I'm Seher Zama, and we're making a start on a very sad note, on a huge loss that has come to us as a nation. Bharat Ratna Pranab Mukherjee is no more. We would, of course, have been in the past 1 week or so keeping close track of his medical health bulletins that was keeping us abreast with what he's suffering. As we know, as much as we'd heard till late this morning, he was already having slipped into a coma on ventilator support, but with septic shock, he succumbed earlier this evening. It is being called the end of an era, and rightfully so. There will be no other politician like him that the country has seen for a long, decades-long innings that we've seen in politics, right from the 1960s, continuing to be an extremely prominent union cabinet minister, having an indelible stamp across various significant moments that the country has seen, be it right to information, food security, kickstarting the UIDAI, and later on being as much interesting as the former president of India as well, and kickstarting new initiatives even at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, breathing in fresh life into the role of the President of India. We are, in this very brief window of time that we have right now, going to be revisiting some of those moments of what he should be best remembered as, speaking to his colleagues, speaking to his admirers on what they would remember him best for. This is a personality who has contributed in so many levels that it is unimaginable put it across in an encapsulated manner. But we will continue with these special condolence messages that you see. Our social media feeds, Twitter and Facebook, is already buzzing with the tragic loss that we are facing right now, and to glorious tributes here that are going to be coming our way. In what has also been announced here is a state mourning for a period of 7 days. The national flag would be at half-mast across all government offices and institutes. State funeral with full military honors is to take place as well. Let's go across to our panelists that we have with us right now. Vinay Tiwari, Managing Editor at Mirror Now. We also have Ms. Neerja Chowdhury, Senior Journalist. Mr. Manishankar Iyer, Senior Leader of the Congress, has been a very, very close colleague of late Pranab Mukherjee. Also, Mr. Amolak Rattan Kohl, Mr. A.R. Kohli, who's been the former governor of Mizoram and also had the few initial early years of their career together. First, going across here to Mr. Manishankar Iyer. He was, of course, a very, very senior Congress leader. He's been your colleague. But as in the course of this evening that we have been speaking to people from across the political spectrum here, this is something that everyone would want to say, not just a Congress leader. Pranab Mukherjee was someone who's reached out to, shared his expertise, his warmth as a colleague across the political spectrum.
Yes, indeed. The gap that he has left in our national life is as great as the gap he left in the Congress party when he became the Rashtrapati in 2012. He truly was a national leader rather than just a Congress leader, because he had an incredibly warm rapport across the floor with the opposition. And this was largely because when the opposition tangled with Congress MPs like myself, it was Pranab who would intervene to bring about some kind of a compromise. And in my particular case, when the BJP boycotted me at my maiden speech in the Rajya Sabha, for having referred to somebody in derogatory terms, it was Pranab who told me that the word I had used, which is unparliamentary and therefore I cannot repeat, is valid in the Lok Sabha, but not valid in the Rajya Sabha, because the Rajya Sabha is still sticking to us till May, whereas the Lok Sabha has its own vocabulary of unparliamentary words. So that is how he enabled me to retain my honor while still making a statement which enabled a resumption of the House. So this is one example of how things work. In just 1 minute, I'd like to give another very important example. Under Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, the old
Absolutely.
practice of empowered groups of ministers was raised to such a height that I think there were nearly 50 EGOMs under the chairmanship of Pranab Mukherjee. In other words, every time a dispute arose between his colleagues in the cabinet, Pranab Mukherjee would be called upon to seek them down and find some sort of a common ground, a compromise, if you like. And because he was so effective at doing that, he was effectively the Prime Minister of India for a whole sheaf of intra cabinet disputes. And that is why I think, although he never formally became the Prime Minister of India, he was undoubtedly the leading minister in Manmohan Singh's cabinet without challenging the Prime Minister himself.
Beautiful. That also further adds to another aspect to what is often said about for the person, for the man, the politician who never became prime minister. But in what you've just explained to us, it was as good as close as, and as significant. Mr. A.R. Kohli, you also have spent significant years and a part of your career also as the former governor of Mizoram. Being very close to him, not just as a colleague, but personally in being very close to him as a friend, as a neighbor in the past as well.
Yes, sir. We were neighbors in the colony of Greater Kailash 2 in Delhi for many years, where he has his personal house. And I can only say a few things about Pranab. He had a fantastic memory par excellence, and he was master in remembering all the statistics and could reproduce any data anytime during the cabinet meetings also. When I remember Mrs. Gandhi had once remarked, that you need not have said something about when you are talking about millions, for a few hundred rupees. That was the kind of data he could reproduce in any meeting anywhere. The second part was he's a wonderful human being. He never rubbed anybody on the wrong side. He always had pleasant words for even his opponents, which was remarkable. He never considered differences in politics as differences. He said these are different perceptions which have to be taken into account while deciding the affairs of the government. And he went as a very successful finance minister, commerce minister, as well as industries minister. He had multiple portfolios. Of course, he was at times the deputy chairman, planning commission also. These are the portfolios, and he had seen the country from a very close angle in every walk of life. And he was dear to every Prime Minister of India. And he did justice to his job.
Yes, absolutely. It's just about revisiting which aspect of his personality, which aspect of his career to decide what was the biggest contribution. But it quite simply is really across the board at various levels. Ms. Neerja Chowdhury, listening to our fellow panelists speak right now, and what we've been listening in the course of the evening as well, ever since this tragic news came in, how would you like to best remember him?
I think Pranab Mukherjee, during the emergency of Indira Gandhi, stood by her, was a minister at that time, and then went on, probably because of his experience during the emergency, went on to become an absolutely convinced proponent of democratic rights and fundamental freedoms and the primacy of parliament, the constitution, and I think that probably what may have been because he saw that a country as diverse, plural, heterogeneous as India could not be run any other way. So one would like to remember him, and I think country will remember him as a man of consensus. Consensus being the way to rule India. Of course, his contributions were phenomenal. Barring home affairs, he held every important portfolio in government, enormous experience and troubleshooter. He knew the Constitution of India, the Constitution of the Congress Party backwards, and we used to joke that if you were to wake up Pranabda, he'd start to recite from the Constitution. So all those qualities were there. But really, I think things that are now disappearing are these that you can talk across parties, have conversations, have dialogue across parties, and go for the the middle part, the root of the consensus. That is what he will really be remembered for and missed for. India will miss him.
Yes. Yes, we will try to also take in some details of these instances on what you're saying, the man of consensus and being fair across the board. Vinay, and what we've heard so far, because of his indelible stamp that he's left behind, because of his unmatchable experience of what we've seen, what about Pranab Mukherjee, the President of India? We're well aware of his long innings in his political career, but also a very, very important contribution as the President of India that we've seen, which perhaps will not be spoken about as much because in terms of decades that he spent in an active, significant political career.
Yes, see, look, amongst the many epithets that that apply to Pranabda, and possibly all of them apply to Pranabda, the one which I think is probably the closest and probably the bitterest in what could have been India's destiny is that he was India's best Prime Minister that never was. And the fact that he ended up occupying what I personally believe is the second most important job. President of India is citizen number one, but clearly in terms of the power structure, the Prime Minister is the number one job in India. He ended up getting, what rightly so was the Rashtrapati Bhavan's job. But having said that, I think for me, India's loss was the fact that he was never India's Prime Minister. Remember, there was a bit of a history on that with when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. The Gandhi family's slight discomfiture at the fact that he had taken command when Indira Gandhi was assassinated and kind of made his ambitions a little public seems to have not gone down very well, and he exited the party for about 5 years or so. He did get rehabilitated, not just because of the fact that they needed him, but because he was possibly the best firefighter, troubleshooter, and the most wise man that they could have found. And I think he himself has expressed that publicly. Even Dr. Manmohan Singh at his own book launch, at Mr. Pranab Mukherjee's book launch, mentioned that Mr. Mukherjee was not very happy about the fact that in 2004 Sonia Gandhi chose him and not Mr. Mukherjee as the Prime Minister. So very obviously, I really believe that while he played a sterling innings at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, there's no question of that. He was a copybook president, understood Constitution like no one else can. The fact that he was never India's Prime Minister was possibly a little bit of a misfortune for us. He would have served us better, especially in the UPA 2, when we had several crises one after the other, which the government struggled to handle. And you could see Mr. Mukherjee's stamp behind the firefighting that was going on, but obviously he was not the man in command. He was somebody who was still reporting to somebody else. And that, to me, was a bit of a misfortune in the sense of the history of India and its top offices in Delhi. Sir.
Yes. Mr. Manishankar Iyer, you of course have mentioned a few personal experiences that you feel will be the lasting memory of our late former President of India here. But in what we have witnessed in so many years, and also looking at our younger viewers watching, in putting that in perspective, in what he really meant in being and holding very significant cabinet ministerial positions as the former finance minister, and several other important cabinet positions here as well. Not just as being the person of the government of the day, but in managing to bring along leaders of the opposition as well, at times when Parliament faced a logjam, at times when everyone had to be brought on board to discuss important policy matters.
I've given you an example already of how he was able to ensure that people who were having differing views did not have to lose face when they arrived at understandings with those whom they had had misunderstandings. And it was quite a genius that he enabled every one of these contestants to feel that they were being listened to, that their ideas were being taken on board, and that all that he was doing was finding common ground between people who were unable to see that there was, in fact, common ground between them. And this must have happened on numerous occasions when he was holding important ministerial portfolios and would have had to deal with the opposition. Unfortunately for me, I was not there, so I can't really give you an example from within government. But I would like to share with you a very important personal experience, which turned out to be my last meeting with him about 2 years ago. I had at that time been suspended from the Congress party, and I went to meet him and I said, how and when do you think this suspension will be ended? And he said to me, it'll never be ended. It'll just finish without its being announced. So I was puzzled by this kind of an ambiguous outcome. So I asked him uh, what he meant. And he gave the example from his own life. He said that suddenly one day in 1988, Santosh Mohan Dev had come to him with a message from Rajiv Gandhi that he should lead the campaign against the Communist Party in Tripura. And he said, how can I possibly lead a Congress campaign when I'm not even in the Congress? And Santosh Mohan Dev said, well, that's my instructions, and I'll have the General Secretary in charge of Tripura meet you to give you your official instructions. A.R. Mallu, who was then the General Secretary, came to meet him and said that the Congress President has asked you to go. So Pranab then said to Mallu that I cannot go like this. You arrange a meeting for me with the Congress President, who is also the Prime Minister of India. And when he went there, Rajiv said, you haven't been expelled. So he said, but the letter I got says that you have ordered my expulsion. And he said that Rajiv apparently said, well, I don't remember doing this, but in any case, we need you now. And took him back. And Pranab actually, for the first time ever, handed over the Tripura government to the Congress party. And with this form of rehabilitation, he took his place in a large room next to my small room in the AICC, where he was sitting among clerks and typists and so forth. And he never complained. He just went on to do his job. And the next assignment he had was as deputy chairman of the Planning Commission. So here was a man who didn't stand on ceremony. In fact, in all his ministerial postings, he continued to live in a tiny little house on Talkatora Road, and outside on his lawns till 11 and 12 o'clock at night, there would be people milling around waiting to see him. And he wouldn't go to bed until he had disposed of each of these people. And then he sat invariably and wrote his memories of the day
Absolutely.
in his diary. And I hope one day it'll be possible for the Pranab Mukherjee estate to give permission for those diaries to be published, because they will
That's right.
be an incredible mine of contemporary history.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I so appreciate you mentioning that. In fact, we also have Mr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, senior Congress leader, with us here as well. Mr. Manu Singhvi, thank you for being with us. We, of course, have been revisiting on what his work has meant for the country here, both in his long innings as an active political career and also as the President of India. What is it that you would remember him as best?
Well, so many memories come flooding back. When I joined public life, the first person I interacted with deeply was Madhara Sindhya. And within a few days, the second person was Pranab Mukherjee. In fact, the first took me to the second. I do not know, of course, in person, anybody quite like him. And I don't think there are many historical political figures either like him. First was the fact that he was completely unpretentious, simple. He had his constants, his daily walk, his puja, work whole day, and then roughly from 8 or 9 till 12, sitting at the desk and disposing of files, meeting everyone, and writing his diary. And he was mortified that for 4 or 5 years of diary were lost, which he had to reconstruct. And he's now published 2 volumes, maybe a third would be published now posthumously. But no socializing, no films, nothing by way of what we inverted commas call relaxation. Relaxation was sitting there on the chair, and I had innumerable meetings. Secondly, I think a man with that kind of institutional recall, it's not just memory, it's an institutional memory, I yet have to come across. I went after becoming a third-term Rajya Sabha MP last year, much after becoming. Couldn't go this year because COVID took over, and though I talked once or twice to his man, I couldn't go over. And I went for a 5-7 minutes formal visit, and it turned out with this amazing 1.5-hour discourse. I had elected this time from West Bengal. So he literally plucked out dates, figures, number of MLAs from roughly 1962 onwards in the Bengal Assembly. And then told me the entire evolutionary graph of Bengal politics with the names, dates, MLA numbers, governments, reasons. So this was somebody who I think was steeped into it. It was memory coupled with analysis, coupled with recall, and everything fit into place when he did these things. I have many times opened speeches involving his ministry in UPA 1 and 2. When we were in the treasury benches in the Rajya Sabha. And, after preparing it and talking to some of his assistants, he would give that short call and make 1 or 2 points, or I'd meet him late in the night. And those 1 or 2 points would really be so incisive and clear that a lot of the other briefing by people who are technocrats or otherwise well-versed would be rendered superfluous. So I think he's quite a remarkable man. Is somebody who cut across party lines. His persona ultimately was issue-based, objective. So people of different political colors were able to trust him, which is why, he was the man to forge consensuses, to find solutions, to get totally disparate political colors or people within his party with serious disagreements agreeing. Innumerable time in the fact that he had some 100 GOMs, oblique EGOMs, is, I think, a Guinness Book of Records. I can't imagine a person. And I used to always tell him frequently that, look, politics has gained a lot with you there, but, law has lost tremendously. You would have been a great lawyer. Constitutional law has lost a scholar. Academia has lost a perennial researcher. Is always the inquisitive student, the scholar, the researcher, till the end of his life. And totally without flamboyance, solidity, but no,
Yes.
And I remember 2 or 3 times, purely by chance, I happened to be sitting next to him on flights to Kolkata and once to Chennai. And Pranab, of course, was an over-busy man, which leads to a shortness and hotness of temper, which he was, but it never lasted. But you catch him when he's relaxed, like the meeting I had at his home last year, as I said, or on these flights. And I have yet to come across a more graceful raconteur, anecdote teller, amazing kind of, and you just went on hoping that you just keep speaking and you kept listening, and everything fell into place in areas where you didn't know about. So I think quite a remarkable personality on talent, on temperament, on ideology, on commitment and conviction. I think I have lost a great friend, philosopher and guide. The Congress party has certainly. And his sheer hard work made you realize that you could do anything with hard work. It was sheer, dogged, unending hard work till the end of his life.
Mr. Singhvi, you also have spoken about his stunning photographic memory in recalling incidents and minutes of the meeting in the past here. But someone like you who understands, is incredibly well versed with subjects of the Constitution, of the Parliament, legalities and laws. He was someone who was known for that. And to which his colleagues and members of the opposition parties would approach him for that expertise as well. For someone like you who understands what it means to be knowing so much about the technicalities of these issues that we've spoken about, did he ever catch you by surprise, the extent to which he knew?
Always. Not many times. You see, we are litigators, lawyers, in a sense, having done some academic work and done a PhD also in academia. But he was, you must realize, temperamentally, he was an academic. He started his life as an academic. He always wanted to be. He never left reading and noting and remembering all his life. See, he had hardly any other interests of a social kind. So this focus of, 60, 70 years, is an amazing accumulation and aggregation. So while we would look at things from our experience as practitioners, case law, or the text, he would bring into it precedents. Now that was something which is to do with institutional recall of a remarkable kind. So, large areas of law are unoccupied. So a precedent which is factual is important. You don't have to have law always. A factual precedent becomes the law. Then secondly, he would surprise me all the time by giving a incident or an anecdote which kind of solved the problem, which the law would not, because the law was a text, or a case law would not deal with that situation. But he would be able to apply it. And that came from sheer experience. After all, he had been in his late 30s when he was brought into this with the Bangla Congress. And the early 40s, he had been made a cabinet minister by Mrs. Indira Gandhi. So that experience is something which you cannot learn from books or from practice. But I can tell you, had he come into law or as a teacher of constitutional law, he would have been a remarkable man in book writing and in teaching, because he had this great intersection of the theoretical constitution, the case law constitution, and the practical realities of working, because he'd been all these ministries, barring home. So he knew also one more thing about him, remarkable grasp of procedure. So, a budget goes through these 5 steps, you may all know. Even I would know, but that it goes through 15 other minuscule steps within those steps, only he would know.
Wow. Beautiful. That is such an incredible insight. Appreciating you sharing that with us, with our viewers. Senior Congress leader, Rajya Sabha MP, Mr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, many thanks for speaking with us here this evening. Ms. Neerja Chowdhury, we've been talking about on how he reached out to the opposition here as well, but also in his incredible role in his capacity as the President of India. In bringing about freshness and changes in the running of the President's office. And what we have seen today with a string of leaders and ministers of the government of the day, even with Prime Minister Modi's tweets that he sent out as condolence messages here. It is a genuine outpour of emotion. We've seen the kind of role that he's played in Prime Minister Modi, especially making a mention and thanking him for how he's mentored his government. This was particularly during the time at the launch of the GST as well.
His presidency was a very non-controversial one, and that is what was appreciated. When he became president, I remember there was such a speculation, Pranab Mukherjee being a congressman, will he do something that, embarrasses the NDA government, and so on. But there was no controversy, no hint of controversy, and yet we used to hear that quietly the Prime Minister would consult him, quietly ideas would go from him to the government. And yet, he will be remembered more as a Congress leader. If you look at the 50 years of his politics and his contribution, he really was not cut out for a ceremonial role. He played that with great finesse and what he called himself constitutionally correct president, which he was. But ultimately, it is as a Congress leader, his contribution to governance, to administration, all the top ministries except home, he contributed to. And I think, and as I said earlier, and of course, intellectual rigor. I remember during the time of the nuclear deal in 2008, of course, the withdrawal of the left, withdrawal of support to the UPA by the left took place on the nuke deal. But the 2 years before that, or 1 year before that, a committee was set up of left and UPA to sort out the differences. And Pranab Mukherjee was the convener, and there were 9 sittings of this committee. And the 10th one was to clinch everything, and the left withdrew their support. But the reams and reams of paper that used to come from the left parties, they were not like regional parties, of their objections to everything, whether it was the HIDAT, 1, 2, 3 agreement, IAEA, safeguard, whatever. And he would formulate the UPA's response point by point by point, and then do the personal thing, with the left leaders. He had very good rapport. They supported him in his Lok Sabha elections also. They supported him also for president. But it was with Jyoti Basu, with Prakash Karath, his meetings to get them to try and get them to tone down, to soften, which didn't really happen. But his role was amazing in that period. As I said, the intellectual rigor was also very much there, part of his persona.
Absolutely. No, undoubtedly, it is going to be impossible to fill his shoes here. This has been a huge loss to India, but it has been a country which has benefited immensely by having him. Ms. Neerja Chowdhury, thank you so much for being with us here, sharing some of your personal experiences and insight here on this as well.